Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. Continue to read from the book called The Secret of Life. Secret of Light, I should say, by Walter Russell. This book was published, I think, in 1947, what I understand. Let me just read a little bit about who Walter Russell is and give you an idea of, who he is and what he's about, because I think it's critical. Most people don't know who he is. And so let's just share that as we go to chapter 3 here, which is not a super long chapter. Walter Russell was born in May of 1871 on the 19th day, and he passed away actually on the same day. That is wow, isn't it? He passed away on May 19th, 1963. That's weird, isn't it? It kind of stands out, doesn't it? He was an impressionist painter of the Boston School. He was a sculpturist. He was a mystic, and he was an author. He lectured, and he did writings. Placed him firmly in what they call the New Thought movement. Russell wrote extensively on science topics, but these writings were not taken seriously by scientists. Well, the reason why it was not taken seriously by the scientists is that basically he went against their whole contrived convention of what they thought, and they blackballed him in some ways. That's the truth, folks. Anyone who does this type of thing naturally has to be a brilliant person in the first place. Two is simply he's somewhat of a threat in reality. I don't know if I'd put him in the New Thought movement, but that's what they've done here. So, he was born in 1871. He died in 1963. He died on his birthday at what I would call 7 years, actually 8 years. So he died on his birthday, 92 years old. Kind of interesting. He was born in Boston. He is from Nova Scotia. That is his immigrants, his parents. He left school. This is what you always get. This is interesting here. He left school at the age of 9 and went to work. This reminds me a lot of another particular writer I've been following, who is a brilliant man also, which is Gerald Massey. Gerald Massey was also put to work as a little boy. Okay, so again, he went to work, then put himself through the Massachusetts Normal Art School. He interrupted his 4th year to spend 3 months in Paris at the Academy of Julian. Biographer Glenn Clark identifies 4 instructors who prepped him or prepared him for his art career. 2 of them actually in Boston, one being Ernest Major and the other one being Albert Munsell. Also Howard Powell, P-Y-L-E, in Philadelphia had influence on him. And then he went, like he said here, he went to Paris and went to Jean-Paul Laurens in Paris. In his youth, unlike what Massey had to go through, which was heartbreaking when you think about it, Russell earned his money as a church organist and a music teacher, and by conducting a trio in a hotel. So he had a gift in that area too. So here's the occupations that this show him is, okay? He's an artist. He's a builder. He is a musician. He is a philosopher. He is an author, and he's a lecturer, okay? Before he left Boston in 1894, so this is basically when he is 23 years old, roughly, he married a lady named Helen Andrews. They traveled to Paris for their wedding trip and a second term for him at the Academy at Julian. After their wedding trip, they settled what we call New York City in 1894 and had two daughters, Helen and Louise. Russell's rise in New York was immediately, that it took place really quick. A reporter wrote in 1908, Mr. Russell came here from Boston and at once became a great artistic success. At age 29, he attracted widespread attention with his allegorical paintings, The Might of Ages, in 1900. The painting represented the United States at the Turin International Exhibition and won several awards. 3 years later, Russell had published three children's books, The Sea Children, The Bending of the Twig, and The Age of Innocence, and qualified for the Authors Club, which he joined in 1902. I didn't know he wrote children's books. I had no idea. Russell made his mark also as a builder. He created a $30 million worth of cooperative apartments. He is credited with developing what the cooperative ownership into an economical, sound, and workable principle. The Hotel des Artistes on West 67th Street in Manhattan, designed by architect George Moore Pollard, has been described as his masterpiece. Russell was also involved in the initial development of Albert Court at 7th Avenue and 58th Street in Manhattan also, but dropped out before the project completion. By 1930s, Russell was employed by Thomas J. Watson. If you know who he is, that's why you hear, it just popped in mind. IBM calls their certain protocol these days, what they're talking about, is Watson. So Watson is the one who actually mastermind what we call international business machines. As a motivational speech for IBM employees, he was employed at IBM for 12 years. At age 56, he turned to being a sculptor and fashion portraits bust of Thomas Edison, Mark Twain, General MacArthur, John Philip Suez, Asif Wishaw, Charles Goodyear, and George Gershwin, and others. He rose to top rank as a sculptor. He won the commissioner for the Mark Twain Memorial in 1934 and for President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Four Freedoms Monument in 1943. Russell became a leader in the Science of Man movement when he was elected president of the Society of Arts and Science in 1927. His 7-year tenure generated many articles in the New York Times. The gold medals awarded by the Society were highly valued. As World War II approached, though, he moved to a top-floor studio at Carnegie Hall, where he lived alone. His estranged wife, Helen, lived in Connecticut. At the time, he was supervising the casting of what we call the Four Freedoms. This was a low time that required a rejuvenation of his health and spirit. They were reports of his egoism and self-gratification also that bothered him. Russell claimed to have experienced a transformational and revelatory event in May of 1921, which he later described in a chapter called The Story of My Illuminating in the 1950 edition of his home study course. During that period, I could perceive all motion and was newly, quote, aware of all things, end quote. Russell used the terminology of Richard Maurice Bucke, B-U-C-K-E, in his book called Cosmic Consciousness to explain cosmic illumination, end quote. Later he wrote, it will be remembered that no one who has ever had the experience he had ever had, and this in quotes here, not in quotes, but in parentheses, the experience of illumination, has been able to explain it. I deem it my duty to the world to tell of it, end quote. This became the subject of the book, The Divine Illiterate, published in 2 volumes in 1949. Russell also published what we call the Universal One in 1926, the Russell generic radio concept in 1930, and defended his ideas in the pages of the New York Times from 1930 to 1931. He published The Secret of Light in 1947 and a new concept of the universe in 1953. Also, Russell copyright what we call a spiral-shaped periodical chart, which is not respected by others, but of the elements in 1926. In fact, he discovered more elements in the whole apparatus, so to speak. Anyway, he wrote, again, about the cosmology was described in New Concept of the Universe, which we'll probably read, where he wrote that, quote, the cardinal error of science was shuttering the creator out of his creation. So basically, he's what we call someone who believes that God is involved in the universe. And science had already begun to move away from that situation thinking. Russell never referred to an anthropomorphic God, but rather wrote that God is the invisible, motionless, sexless, undivided, and unconditional white magnetic light of mind, end quote, which centers in all things. That is, God is provable by laboratory methods, he states. The locatable, motionless light, which man calls magnetism, is the light which God is. He wrote that religion and science must come together in a new age. By 1948, he met a young lady, much younger than him, that is. He divorced his first wife and married Daisy Stebling, that is, at age 44. So he is actually roughly 33 years older than she is. An immigrant from England and former model and businesswoman amid some controversy. She changed her name to Leah, after Leah Zeus, I should say, the Chinese illuminate, and they embarked on a cross-country automobile trip from Reno, looking for a place to establish a workplace and a museum for his work. They discovered, though, in Swanola, that is the Palea estate of a railroad magnate, long abandoned, on a mountaintop on the border of Augusta and Nelson County in Virginia, and leased the property for 50 years. There they established the museum and the Walter Russell Foundation. In 1957, the Commonwealth of Virginia granted a charter for the University of Science and Philosophy, a corresponding school with home study courses. In 2014, the charter was grandfathered back to 1948. The Russells collaborated on a number of books. The testing of atomic bombs in their atmosphere prompted them to publish his work, that is, and her, Atomic Suicide, in 1957, in which they warned of grave consequences for the planet and humankind if radioactivity was exploded as a world fuel. 10 years later, actually 6 years later, he passed away in 1963. His wife passed away another 25 years later. So he's written many books. He wrote, like I said, the children's books. And I'm wondering if his wife wrote any books. I'm sure she did. Well, they combined it with what we call the home study course with both of them. He also wrote the book Early Whisperling, 1949. He also wrote in 1951 The Scientific Answer to Human Relations with his wife. A New Concept of the Universe, which I've already spoken of, Atomic Suicide. He also wrote the book called The World Crisis, Its Explanation, that is, and Solution with his wife, Leah, in 1958. And The One World Purpose with Leah, which is, again, was written in 1960. I think it's kind of strange in some ways that he was born a certain day. I think it's May, I think it was, and he passed away actually on his birthday, May 19th. May 19th to May 19th, 92 years old. A brilliant man, indeed. But very few people know about who he is because he's not considered politically correct, if you know what I'm saying. That's how they somewhat keep you, they kind of blackball you in that perspective. But anyway, let's get into the work here, Chapter 3, The Cessation and Consciousness. I didn't mean to get into this, but I thought it's important since I had not read anything about him to you as introducing you to him. And it's kind of interesting that basically I know some things about him, but I didn't know all those things which they're speaking of. So let me just do a quick thing here and make it easier for me to read. So God is consciousness, you see. This is what it is. Consciousness is static. Consciousness is the knowing of mind. Knowing is static. Consciousness is the spiritual awareness of being, of all knowing, all power, and all presence. Thinking is electric. God thinking is expressed by two-way, moving wave extensions from consciousness, like a lever swinging upon a fixed fulcrum, or like waves extended from the calm sea. Thought expression is dynamic. Thinking belongs to the electrical sense and conditioning vibrating universe of motion. Thinking is the motionless principle in light, which creates the illusion of motion. The self of man belongs to the static, invisible consciousness, unconditional universe of knowing. We express knowing in the dynamic, visible, electrical, and conditional universe of sensation. Sensation is the electrical awareness of motion, simulating the spiritual qualities of the one idea by creating image, that is, quantities of separate forms which seem to have substance. Consciousness is real. Sensation simulates reality through motion of interchanging lights, but the mirage of a city is not the city it reflects. Confusion and misunderstanding as to whether we are thinking consciously from knowledge or sensing electrically from memory records stored in our brains have led us to the necessity of distinguishing between the two by the common uses of each term, or such terms as the human mind, quote, and, quote, the mortal mind, end quote. We know full well while using them that there is but the one mind of the one living God of love. The universal mind centers every particle and mass in this universe, animal, vegetable, or mineral, electron, atom, or sun. So this would tie in with, I'm trying to think of his name right himself, out in California. He's the one that built the Bell helicopter, and I can't think of his name, but it'll come to me. So anyway, man is the only unit in creation who has conscious awareness of the spirit within him and electrical awareness of dually conditioned light acting upon his senses. All other units of creation have electrical awareness only. So man has two gifts, so to speak. Man alone can be free from body to think with God, to talk with God, and be inspired by his centering light. All other units of creation are limited in their actions to the automatic reflexes from sense memory built up through ages of sensing and recording such sensing as instinct. Likewise, the same confusion leads us to the adoption of such terms as subconscious mind and superconscious mind. There is but one mind functioning universally, that is, within all creating things, and that one mind is not stratified nor divided into the more or less. There are no differing conditions of the one mind, nor are there different kinds of mind. And then he goes into a different section here in this particular chapter called imagination. God is the imaginer of his one idea. All imagining is God's imaging, or imagining, I should say. All creative forms in this thought universe of God's imagining are built in the image of his imagining, creating in his image, end quote. All forms in this creative universe of imaginate forms are but electrical recordings of God's imagining. They have no existence. Records of ideas are not the ideas they record. They have no substance. They are but black and white lights of sun-centered wave fields of space assembled in vibrating systems to simulate substance in its objective universe, which is not but seems to be. God imagining never began and will never end. It was not, quote, created, end quote, as some remote pastime by some vast cosmic event as commonly believed, nor is it condemned to a, quote, heat-death, end quote, by expansion into nothingness, which makes no sense. This is a creating universe. In other words, the world, this is what me and Phil Langdon talked about. It's always creation taking place. Okay. The idea, what I've got from Phil simply is that the black holes that people think is basically what we call basically the seed, eventually leading to the expansion, eventually to another opening of another universe. This takes place. This is almost automatic. And yet the media doesn't understand that in a lot of ways. Well, most people don't understand that, you see. So what he's saying is if this is creating universe, it doesn't die. It just continues to expand and expand and expand. It's not stopping. God did not begin to imagine at some fixed time, for time does not exist with God. True. This light wave universe, which records God's knowing by his thinking and imagining, is as eternal as God thinking is eternal. Next section is called inspiration. So we have imagination and now we have inspiration. Inspiration is the language of light which man uses to talk with God. Inspiration is that deep awareness of the consciousness of being which differentiates the genius or mystic form from the being of average intelligence. Inspiration in man is accompanied by an intense mental ecstasy, which is characteristic of all who become intentionally conscious of their closeness to God. Inspired geniuses forget their bodies while deeply conscious of their existence as holy mind. Their bodies, thus forgotten, and almost automatically in obedience to instinct and cell memory reflexes. Inspired genius translates God's knowing into words of man for the soul of man. They uplift all mankind by re-inspiring all who listen to their aesthetic words and rhythms. He who attunes his heart to the messages of genius purifies himself. No impurity can there be in his heart, for verily he then is communion with the Holy One. Man alone, these are quotes from Walter Russell, man alone of all my creating things hath begun to hear my whispering. Since his beginning, my still small voice hath whispered within him that I am he and he me. But even now, barbaric man on thy small new world heareth Dudley, and maketh idols which he treasures before me, for he is still new. He is still but in the ferment of his early brewing. For I say that all things which floweth from life of me have life of me flowing through them. To the least of these, but I say that though my light of immortal light floweth through those mortal symbols of my thinking, it toucheth them not in his passing. Quote, when they shall know the light of me in them, then they shall be me and I them. See, that's the whole idea here. Here's the duality, you see, because we are from God, okay, but bringing it together, you see, bringing about what we call singularity. These quotations are from the book, again, of Divine Elidiot. So we're going to stop here with this particular chapter, which is chapter 4, and take another pause, and then we'll probably do another particular chapter. I said chapter 4, I'm sorry, chapter 3, and then we'll go into chapter 4 a little later. So thank you for being here, and appreciate you listening. I hope that what I share will stimulate and encourage you to begin to pursue deeper things. And so you have a good evening, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.